Good evening and welcome to everyone joining us today at this webinar. My name is Matthee. I will be moderating today's webinar, in which we will focus on the recent allegations in the media against Kwasizabantu Mission. In particular, the allegations that Kwasizabantu Mission is a cult. It is my privilege to welcome and introduce our distinguished panelists, but before I do that, perhaps I can just check whether people can hear us well, whether the sound is working well. If you can respond in the Q&A function of the webinar, where we will be able to see whether you are able to follow us. So if you can give us some indication before I introduce our guests. Also wish to welcome everyone literally from all over the world, also those that are watching over live streaming. But before we continue, perhaps I will just check if all systems are good. Looks like everyone can hear us well. So on that note, we will then proceed. It is my privilege to introduce and welcome our distinguished panelists. Firstly, Professor Kim from Hyun-Jin University in South Korea. Professor Kim obtained his doctorate from Northwest University here in South Africa on the subject of Missiology. He has since been appointed as professor at Hyun-Jin University in South Korea, where he teaches Missiology. And again, I know that it is 2 a.m. in South Korea, where Professor Kim is joining us from. And we really would like to say thank you, Professor, for taking the time and the effort to join us at this very early hour for you. Unfortunately, Professor Henk Stoker is not able to participate tonight. We hope that he will be able to join us next time. However, we are delighted that Senior Advocate Keith Matthee is able to join us. Advocate Matthee, after he qualified as a lawyer, worked for the Student Christian Association and then also for the Methodist Church. He's not only a lawyer, he also holds a Bachelor in Divinity from Rhodes University. Advocate Matthee has appeared in all the courts in South Africa. He acted as a judge in a number of courts. And then in 2002, he was appointed by President Thabo Mbeki as senior counsel. He's also the author of 3 books. Then I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Peter Hammond, who's also part of the panel today. Dr. Hammond is the founder and director of Frontline Fellowship. He's also the founder and chairman of Africa Christian Action. And he's the director of the Christian Action Network and also the chairman of the Reformation Society. Dr. Hammond is known for the number of books that he has authored. He's also worked with Scripture Union and Hospital Christian Fellowship. He's earned a doctorate in Missiology and also an honorary doctorate in Divinity. Then Dr. Fleischmann, who is also part of our team tonight, our team of panelists. She's a researcher at CEDAR International Academy. Dr. Fleischmann is currently busy with her 2nd doctorate, and the focus of this doctorate is the life and the ministry and the teachings of Reverend Erlo Stegen, which, as you would know, is the founder of Kwasizabantu Mission. She also researches revivals, and Dr. Fleischmann has known Kwasizabantu Mission for more than 35 years and has also lived on the mission for more than 18 years. And of course, part of the team here is our backup and support, without which we can't do this webinar, Johan Eshkash, and we appreciate that as well. So I'm going to start and not waste any more time on introductions, and I'd like to start with Advocate Matthee. Advocate Matthee, who has been involved in Kwasizabantu Mission's response to the recent allegations. And I am just going to hand over at this point to Advocate Matthee to perhaps set the background for us of the allegations and also what the mission's response has been and what his take is. Advocate Matthee.
Thanks, Martus. I have an impossible task of, in the time allotted to me, trying to summarize some 250 pages of written submissions that we've done over the last 8 weeks.
But what we then decided to do was to go through the transcript of the first Exodus video, line by line, and to break it down, and then to respond to each allegation. And later we did the same with the 2000 report, that we were ambushed by a few days after the Exodus video came out. And the allegations in the 2000 report and in the Exodus video are basically the same, except with one difference. And also in terms of the same people, the notable exception was Mr. Peter Hammond, and I'll get back to him. As I said, we've submitted something like 250 to 300 pages of written submissions, which include many affidavits. In addition to that, I also said we need to lay criminal charges so that the allegations, and we are particularly concerned about the allegations of mass ongoing rape at the mission, so that the correct state institution to investigate that was the police, and they would then send it to the National Director of Public Prosecutions, and we've kept on pursuing the police, saying how far are the investigations in terms of that. And that is just to show that we were acting with transparency, but also we are trying to act in a way where there was a framework and not just vague machine gun allegations. We're trying to break it down allegation by allegation. Tonight, I briefly want to highlight the essence of our allegations and what we try to do in terms of what was before us. And at the beginning, I said perhaps it's a good thing that Prof. Sturker couldn't make tonight, and that you got a lawyer in his place. Because in the Exodus video, and indeed in the 2000 report, there's a crucial small word, if. So you'll see that in the Exodus video, the expert that they use, Dion Foster, he sets out what a cult is, etc., etc. And then towards the end, he says, if the allegations are true. And then he then says certain things on the assumption that if they are true. And likewise, in the 2000 report by the two pastors who put that together, if you read that report, exactly the same. In effect, they say, if the allegations are true, and crucial is that the allegations, both that Dion Foster was confronted with and the 2000 report, these were untested. And Peter has touched on that and what's necessary in terms of the right to be heard. They were untested allegations. So there was a fatal error in both Dion's approach and I think it is also just dishonest of the producers of the Exodus. And similarly, there was a fatal error in the 2000 report because there was a disconnect. They said if it was true, and then they came to certain conclusions. And the first question was to establish whether or not the allegations were true. And that simply hasn't been done. Wasn't done in 2000, and it certainly wasn't done in the video, the Exodus video. What we then had to do, because we were confronted by very vague allegations, so we then looked at the so-called evidence that was produced by the accusers of the mission, and particularly we looked at the credibility of the witnesses, and that's how lawyers work. They say, right, how credible is this witness? And sometimes you look at something that's totally unrelated to the actual issue at hand, but that can illustrate that they are lying witnesses. And if they are lying witnesses in one regard, then one has to test, one has to seriously question their credibility. And then also the probabilities. The probabilities, and Peter's actually also touched on the probabilities in that regard as well, and I'll get back to that. Also to say that the mission, as of today, have not been permitted in any way to test, personally, to test the evidence of the accusers. In fact, the mission still doesn't know the full list of the accusers. We try from press reports and from other sources, we try and put together who these accusers are. And the sort of figure is somewhere between 15 and 40. But we, like the CRL Commission, they heard the accusers without and said we can't be present. So we had to rely on what the press reported. The press were allowed to be present, but we weren't allowed to be present. So we're still not quite sure of all the accusers. We know who the main ones are. And I want to now just very quickly look at what I would regard as some of the star witnesses of the Exodus. And then another person who's not a star witness in the Exodus, but if one has a look at his blog, he has been central in driving this campaign against Kwasizabantu, and that's Mr. Peter Hammond. Firstly, we have Erica Borman. She left the mission in 1992. And as I say, we have affidavits, we've submitted affidavits, all in support of what I'm about to say. If you look at the video, she leaves the impression, and the producers of the video leave the impression that as a 16-year-old, because of a minor misdemeanor, she was expelled from school. She had to pack her case with the full approval of her mother and had to go find her own way in the big bad world at 16 years old in Standard 8. That's, if you look at the transcript, that's the impression that's created. The reality is that she matriculated at the school, at the mission. She was, in fact, a Dutch scholar, one of the Dutch scholars. She shared the Dutch Scholar Award. And in fact, the following year, she came back as an assistant teacher. This is utterly irreconcilable with what is portrayed in the Exodus video. The only conclusion as a lawyer is all the producers involved themselves in crude dishonesty. So nothing else she says one can have regard to. Or indeed, if the producers were part of that and they somehow edited what she said to create that impression, nothing that comes from Mr. Besson and the others who are involved in the Exodus can be believed, because they clearly then have a dishonest agenda. That's Erica Borman. The other star witness was Mr. Kwasizabantu, who left the mission in 1994. If you watch the Exodus video, he says that the key point for him, the decisive point, was a mining venture headed up, driven relentlessly by Reverend Erla Stegen. And there was a huge amount of money lost as a result of this venture. He says that was the end of it for him. That's when he decided to leave the mission. He'd had enough. He'd become totally disillusioned. On closer examination, and we've supplied the documentary evidence, Reverend Erla Stegen had nothing to do with that venture. It, in fact, was his father-in-law, Mr. I think it's Heinrich, Mr. Friedel Stegen. It had nothing to do with Reverend Erla Stegen. And we've supplied the documentation to show that. So once again, he's lying. Both of them, Erica Borman and Kwasizabantu, in their evidence, talk about multiple ongoing rapes at the mission, right up until this day. This notwithstanding, they've never ever laid one charge. They've never gone to the police. There's been no evidence of that. That's part of the reason why we went to the police, to say, please investigate these allegations, because if they're false, that's criminal defamation. That's criminal injury. But if they're true, then we need to act on it. Nothing, absolutely nothing has come up. In fact, what has happened is that they've tried to shift the goalposts, including the producers at News 24. They've tried to move away from the most serious of all allegations, and that is the multiple ongoing rapes. And they're trying to move away because they know they cannot prove. They know that was simply a ploy of theirs to get viewers to subscribe to their videos. Then we have another young girl who, just as an example, she, Miss Melinda, and she left the mission in 1990. And she associated herself with the accusers of what a terrible place the KwaZulu-Bantu mission is. The problem for her is that the people at the mission then started doing some investigation. And they got onto her Facebook. And we've supplied this evidence as well. And on her Facebook, amongst other things, this is by her, there's a picture of them at school. And her comment is, "Oh, what a happy time in my life. See if you can spot me." Then the next, "Hey, and I see Kululiwa and can't help but feel a sense of love and unity we had for one another. I can surely say in my lifetime, I've loved and have been loved. We knew each other by name, surname, place of birth, and siblings." And then again, this brings such beautiful memories. Thanks to honor, Uncle Lungani Umfung Gilman. Those are her memories, and that was, I think the Facebook was in 2017. That appeared on her Facebook. Then, if you look at the video, one of the allegations is that there's discrimination between the rich and the poor, and that the poor lived in terrible circumstances, and that the rich, being Reverend Erla Stegen and the others, lived a life of luxury. That's the picture they try and communicate. And when they do that, they show terrible living circumstances, and then they jump to Reverend Erla Stegen playing tennis on a tennis court, clearly creating the impression that's a tennis court on the mission. Now, there is no, I was on the mission for 7 days, and there is not a tennis court on the mission. There never has been. That's clearly just a manipulation as well by the producers of Exodus to sustain their narrative. Then we get to Mr. Peter Hammond. He up until he joined the mission way back in, I think it was 1995. And once again, we have evidence for all of this. Yes, 1995. And in fact, he was one of the main teachers at the Bible school and was very involved in the mission, so much so that in 2017, he was sent by the mission to the United States of America to help secure or help improve the KwaZulu-Bantu in the States on behalf of KwaZulu-Bantu, KwaZulu-Natal. Also, crucially, 2000 report brought out by those few pastors that were highly critical of the mission that I've referred to. The response of the mission, there were 3 authors of the response of the mission, which was a complete defense of the mission against all the allegations. Remember, the allegations are virtually identical, except for the one issue of money laundering. Otherwise, the allegations are identical. It includes the allegation of cult. One of the authors was, in fact, Mr. Peter Hammond. That's of the 2000 report. Furthermore, if you look at Mr. Hammond in 19, and I'll just give some brief examples. In 2017, as I say, he was sent to the United States by the mission. Just before he left, he addressed the congregation at KwaZulu-Bantu. Now, this is July, the 9th of July, 2017, and there's a tape of it. And I'll just give some very brief extracts from Mr. Peter Hammond, what he said in 2017 about the mission. "There's no greater human being in my life than Uncle Erla. And as I thank God, I want to thank in the same breath Uncle Erla. The way he supported and supports me and Andra and encourages and has faith in us many times was the petrol to carry on in our lives. KwaZulu-Bantu is a very special place. The revival, that's the 1966 one, which he alleges is part of why he says it's a cult, because of the emphasis on the revival. And also the message, the gospel that we have received here is everything we need to be able to walk as Jesus walked. I'm thankful this morning for one thing, and that is Andra and I go to America, and we know that we're going as people of KwaZulu-Bantu to a KwaZulu-Bantu branch. So we would like to think that God has just retired us to go to America to just turned 65, to do something there for the mission, to open a door, to get our people there, to come and preach, to share the precious gospel in the Bible, get people to come here and see you and see the people of God. May the Lord be with you. And once again, Uncle Erlo, Uncle Friedel, Auntie Torforzo, that's Lydia Doobie, who she now calls the Jezebel of the mission. This is recently. Oh, yes, and the other co-workers, thank you. God be with you. He and his wife then returned to the mission in December 2007. And on Christmas, at the Christmas Day service, he's asked by Reverend Erlo Spiegel to lead the prayer. And this is what he says before the prayer. All I want to say is that it is the most wonderful thing to be here this Christmas. It is beyond joy to be able to be with Uncle Erlo, Uncle Friedel, Uncle Heine, the Kulus, that includes Lydia Dube, in Samu, and all the people of Kwasizabantu. We miss you there in America. That place is too white. No Zulus there. We love you, and it is special to be here. Thank you so much. As I said, included there is Lydia Dube, who he now calls the Jezebel of Kwasizabantu. Now, the problem is, who do you believe? Do you believe the Peter of today with his vicious attacks on the mission, vicious attacks, including also making allegations of rape? And remember, when it comes to a cult, it's not something that just happens overnight. If it was a cult, he, as one of the leading teachers, theological teachers at the mission from 1995, would have been very aware of it. In fact, he would have been part of the problem. Absolutely no hint. I've just read to you what he said in 2017, and this is evidence. It's not allegations, it's not vague, it's specific evidence of what he said. Who does one believe? And certainly, or which Boerta does one believe? The Boerta of today or the Boerta of 3 years ago? And there's such a fundamental difference between the versions that certainly in any court of law, the conclusion would be by a judge, or one can have no regard to anything else he says because of the severe credibility problem that he has. All the accusations are very vague. For example, Mr. Boerta himself, and this is a quote. Mr. Boerta reports that the message given is that outside of the mission there is no salvation, and if you leave, you're shunned because you've left the way, inverted commas. The mission is very careful not to state this belief openly, as it considers itself to be part of the evangelical fraternity, but to insiders the message is clear, unquote. That's what Boerta is saying now. Why now? Why not in 2000 when he defended the mission? Why not in 2017 when he gave such thanks for what the mission had done for him? Why did he go and set up a mission in America on behalf of this terrible place that he says it is? It simply makes no sense. The only reasonable conclusion is that he somehow has an agenda that is certainly not driven by the pursuit of truth. And crucial when it comes to these accusations, these vague accusations, and they all like this when it comes to the accusation that it's a cult. When I arrived there, what I realized is that there are books written by Reverend Erlo Spiegel. There are hundreds upon hundreds of sermons that have been recorded by him and by other preachers at the mission. If you look at the 2000 report, if you look at the Exodus report, now the video, there's no reliance. They simply haven't gone to the primary source. And the primary source, they're there. The best they can do is this, saying the mission is very careful not to state this belief openly as it considers itself to be part of the evangelical fraternity, but to insiders it is clear. It's vague. If that was the case, Reverend Spiegel has been preaching for 50 years, Erlo Spiegel, for 50 years. There are hundreds upon hundreds of sermons. There are his books he's written. If this was the case, and these accusers had since 2000 another 20 years to carefully scrutinize, and I assure you they must have scrutinized. They Mr. Botha is a bright man. Koos is obviously a bright man. They would have scrutinized. They've come up with nothing, absolutely nothing, in terms of the primary sources. They've had to rely on well, it's difficult to prove that everyone knows that's the case. That simply, it just doesn't hold up. Another person that's crucial, and this is very, very important to highlight in terms of the 2000 report. One of the people involved in the 2000 report was a Mr. Martin Fischer. And the evidence we've supplied in terms of Mr. Martin Fischer, and this is from one of the wives that it's alleged the mission drove her husband away or drove a wedge between them. And this is what that wife says about Mr. Martin Fischer. The very weapons he was using against my very dear brothers and sisters, I could not agree to this. She's now referring to her husband, because I had a soul and a mind of my own. My reluctance to participate in his campaign against the mission resulted in ill treatment from him and his friends, including Martin Fischer, who was part of the self-appointed panel in 2000. On 2 occasions, I was held against my will. This is kidnapping. Interrogated by Quibus and his friends in order to coerce me into joining their attack on the mission. On one occasion, Quibus removed me from the mission against my will and under false pretenses of going to the beach, and took me to Frankfurt. I could only return after the intervention of a Dutch reform minister. On another occasion, when Martin Fischer was present and actively pressurizing me, I was held for the entire night against my will, and whilst my 3 children, being 1, 5, and 6, old at the time, were left alone in the room in another building. The aim was to coerce me into denouncing Reverend Stegen and the mission. At some point before I was divorced, I was told to remove my wedding ring so that Quibus cohorts can find him a better wife. Now, the same Mr. Fischer has also now testified before the CLL Commission. Now, I know some of the pastors that were involved in the 2000 report, and I have a high regard for them. But you just need one person with an agenda, particularly where the people who are being accused haven't got a right or haven't been able to set their, for whatever reason, there just because they chose not, because they felt it was an illegitimate process. But they haven't heard the other side. You just need one person with an agenda in that group, in that committee that made the decisions the 2000 group made, to actually guide the rest of the folk to reach a point where they forget about the if, and they simply look at the allegations. They forget about their responsibility to first establish whether in fact the allegations are true. And before they know it, and if you in fact read the report of the 2000 report, you'll see sometimes in the same sentence, they refer to the if, but in the second part of the sentence, they speak as if it's been proven. There's a total what I call a forensic disconnect. They've forgotten that they need to start, and I think Peter touched on that. They need to first establish, in fact, are the allegations true? They also rely on Mr. Peckham. I think he died in 2007. He was also a theologian on what he wrote about the mission. Crucial again, coming back to the if the allegations are true, we have an affidavit by his sister saying that the late Mr. Peckham only spent one night at the mission, only one night. The question for me as a lawyer is, does that qualify him to answer the if questions? It obviously doesn't. Peter has mentioned the conferences. We presented evidence that over the years, up to, I think the last one was about 2017, there have been 17 conferences. The folk who've been involved in the conferences have ranged, and we've summarized some of those folk. And they're available. All the conferences, all the speakers are available to anyone who wants to see them. But a brief summary, it's the who's who of the mainline churches, Pentecostal churches, I personally, huge influence in my life was Lebris, with the late Francis Schaeffer, the director of the Lebris region. In fact, has also been, soon after the 2000 report came out, also was one of the speakers. Now, they are the most critical evangelical thinkers around in the world, and they were invited. And as Peter also mentioned, if central, as I understand the cult, is that you want to control the thought process of the people in the mission. Why get people like this to come and talk? If you look at the names, it includes an archbishop. It includes a bishop of the archbishop of the Anglican Church and a bishop of the Anglican Church. In fact, 4 or 5 weeks ago, Cardinal Wilfred Napier arrived on the mission as a sign of support in their time of crisis. I mean, he's a Catholic cardinal. You can't imagine a more diverse group of people supporting the mission, and that's not consistent with someone. And for me, the coup d'état is if you look at the speakers and you look at the program of those 17 conferences, you will see how seldom Dr. Reverend Erlo Stegen actually speaks. Now, if he wanted to control the minds and the thought processes and the theology of the people at the mission, why on earth would he speak so seldom and allow these other folk to come in, and folk who come from across the spectrum? It simply doesn't make sense. Another point that Peter made, and it's a crucial bit of evidence when it comes to probabilities. We're not quite sure how many complainants there are here, how many accusers, as I said, because it's been kept away from us largely. But we've sort of worked out somewhere between 20 and 40. And we know some of the names, but only a few of the names. I asked Matthee to ask the mission to do an investigation to see during the period that's under that allegedly these things all happen, how many people have come through the mission. It's where Peter will even be surprised. It's not thousands. They get a figure of 3 million.
So, sorry, don't want to interrupt you. I think just to also give Professor Kim a chance, and Dr. Fleischmann, perhaps you can wrap up that point.
I think, Matthee, I think I'm finished. I just wanted to make the point that 3 million versus 20 to 40. And I just wanted to end off with a quote by Adolf Hitler. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Thanks a lot, Matthee. And just to say, if there are any questions, please just send it to Matthee, and I'm sure he'll send it on to me. Thanks, Matthee.
Thank you, Advocate Matthee. Thank you for your time. I know that you actually had other commitments tonight, and you put that aside to be able to speak to us. It's obviously a very, very vast topic, and one is not able to deal with it comprehensively as one would like to. Dr. Hammond, welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us, and I know that you also have a very tight schedule. And we know that you wrote, or that the media storm really started with the News 24 publications, and in particular the Exodus video. You also have written a review on the Exodus film, and perhaps at this juncture I can hand over to you to take us through it and also give us your comments on the topic of this webinar.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, I had the opportunity to go through this a video, and I must say it's very disturbing, this Exodus uncovering a cult in Kwasizabantu in KwaZulu-Natal. And it's something of a horror film, and they make a lot of use of reenactments, and there's a lot of accusations, but it's actually a very small selection of individuals who are embittered and who are disgruntled. And when you think of the small handful of disgruntled people that this film actually concentrates on, there's something that immediately struck me as, but what about the thousands of people who've gone to Kwasizabantu and whose experiences have been very different? And that includes myself. I've known Kwasizabantu mission for over 34 years, and as a regular guest speaker, I've not only gone frequently to Kwasizabantu mission, sometimes for several weeks in a given year, living on the mission, not during times of conferences and so on, but during normal times too. But so I've been a regular guest speaker at Kwasizabantu mission, not only Kwasizabantu in KwaZulu, but I've been to all the related affiliated branches across South Africa, in Mpumalanga and in the Orange Free State and the Cape, and in Transvaal, all the way over to Switzerland and Germany and France and Belgium and Netherlands. And my experience with Kwasizabantu mission over these decades has been very different, and every member of my family sees it as a highlight of our life to go there, and it's just the closest thing to heaven on this side of earth. So there's a whole lot of us who see Kwasizabantu very differently, and we're very sorry for the very negative experiences being related by these people who seem to have gotten very embittered, and we're sorry and we wish they can be helped. But how can their experiences negate what thousands, tens of thousands of people have experienced at youth conferences and the ministers' conferences over many decades? We talk about 5 decades of this mission at the present location. The King of the Zulus, King Goodwill Zwelithini, has described Reverend Erlo Stegen as God's apostle to the Zulus, and Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi has described it as one of the greatest blessings to the Zulu nation and people. And Northwest University has honored Reverend Erlo Stegen for his phenomenal work in education and upliftment, in all that he's done in developing life for some of the poorest people in some of the most extraordinary ways. And you look at what the people like in Tugela Valley are saying, and going to these different mission stations and outreaches and speaking to people concerned. And I haven't just flown in for a few days here and there. I've been on the ground for weeks and months, over years and decades, and I've seen the good fruit of this ministry, not only in KwaZulu and throughout South Africa, but across Europe and into Mozambique and Angola. The work of Kwasizabantu is vast. Now, understandably, knowing the depravity of man and knowing human frailties and weaknesses and sins, obviously bad things are going to happen. And in any community, you are going to have some terrible things happen, and sometimes even criminal activities. And this is true in any town or village or even congregation. But to blame the entire mission or movement or every individual in it or the leadership for what some individuals may have done is not only unjust and unfair, but it's unbiblical. And so the principle here is the first to present this case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him. That's in Proverbs 18, verse 17. It's so important that we have both sides, and plainly the Exodus film does not have that. It doesn't have both sides. You don't have an accusation and then the counter answer from Uncle Erlo, for example, or any of the other people concerned. What also struck me about the whole Exodus film was that most of the hostility that comes out of it is coming from Kwasizabantu, who describes himself as a person who was actually recruited by military intelligence to work with the security police in order to spy on Kwasizabantu. And some of the most serious allegations of sexual abuse were against Muzi Kanene, who described himself as a spy who was tasked by the ANC back in 1979 to infiltrate and to spy on Kwasizabantu mission. And when the ANC took over the country in 1994, he left the mission and he joined National Intelligence Service, where he was involved in discrediting, by his own estimation, by his own description, discrediting and doing smear campaigns against enemies of the government. And here, Muzi Kanene is at this moment serving life in prison for murder. So you've got these sources of some things. These are individuals who have done some criminal activities. And to smear the entire mission with it, when I think of even small missions like ours, we've had criminal individuals and criminal behavior by individuals who've come in and around and through our mission and might have been disciplined or kicked out or might have left under different circumstances. To be able to, in all of the missions I've studied in history or come across, you get things happening. There are some bad people, and in fact, understanding the biblical teaching of the depravity of man, there is good in the worst of us, and there's bad, even evil, in the best of us. because we are created by God, there is good even in the worst. But because we are fallen creation, there is bad, there's even evil in every one of us. And so that's why we need community and we need checks and balances, and we continually need to beware when we think we stand lest we fall. And by the measure that we judge others, we will be judged. Now, if these individuals who are very much throwing stones at Kwasizabantu mission were to be evaluated by the standards that they are judging the mission and people in the mission, the leaders of the mission, in their lives, where would they stand? How have they treated people? How have they been in terms of their responsibility? But looking at the incredible blessings Kwasizabantu has been to so many people for so many decades, never taking offerings. If they were into it for money, which is what is the clear accusation of this Exodus film, then why are they never having an offering? Why don't they charge for camps and courses and conferences and youth conferences? Because the cost of feeding so many people and housing and accommodating and transporting, and yet they've done this freely. That's not the sign of an exploitative money-grabbing bunch. It's the exact opposite. Kwasizabantu has been extraordinarily generous in their hospitality, in their ministry, and that freely give. Freely you've received, freely give. We can learn a lot more about Kwasizabantu from God Amongst the Zulus, written by Dr. Kurt Koch, than we can from this Exodus film, because Dr. Kurt Koch was an expert in revivals and in false religions and cults. And so Dr. Kurt Koch, who had exposed false revivals and false movements, cults and so on, in Indonesia, for example, the famous Indonesian revival, which he exposed as fraud. And he came to Kwasizabantu mission in KwaZulu, doubtless with the idea that he could expose a fraud like he's found so many others. And he was so impressed that he and his wife and children settled there, and he wrote the book God Amongst the Zulus, and he discovered this was the real thing. Now, this is a highly critical academic man, Dr. Kurt Koch, who's written Occult ABC and Christian Counseling and Occult and so many other books, Christ versus Satan and others. Now, Dr. Kurt Koch's estimation after serious academic research and going behind the scenes, he was convinced that what he was dealing with was a real work of the Holy Spirit and genuine people who saw others as better than themselves and were continually self-giving and self-sacrificial. So I've been very struck by the fact that what the Exodus filmmakers of News 24, should we say Newspeak 24, which is a real hatchet job, it's trial by media. And I don't think any of us would want to be tried by media, where you don't seem to have a right of reply and it's just one-sided. To balance it out with reality and with the reality we know and with what we see and the fruit, the very good fruit there, it's exceedingly unfair. And most importantly, on the main topic of tonight, on Is Kwasizabantu a Cult? All the different books on cults, whether you're talking about Kingdom of the Cults, many of these different books which I've got on my shelf, their definitions of a cult is a false soteriology, that their way of salvation is a salvation by works and not by the blood of Christ's atonement given by the grace of God, received by faith alone. That salvation is solus Christus. Christ alone is the only atonement for our sins, the only head of the church, and Christ alone is the only mediator between God and man. And that salvation is by the grace of God alone, received by faith alone. Now, these great solas of the Reformation, I see lived out at Kwasizabantu. They preach the grace of God alone. They preach salvation by faith. And their Christology is orthodox. Their soteriology is orthodox. And so one of the things that you can see, particularly with a cult, is they protect their people, they isolate their people from external influence. Well, this seems very opposite with Kwasizabantu mission. Kwasizabantu mission has invited some very well-known Bible teachers and respected church leaders from around the world to ministers' conferences, amongst other events. And as somebody who's been frequently a guest speaker at Kwasizabantu for 34 years, I can say I've never been told what not to speak on, and I've very, very seldom even been given the topic to deal with. Normally it's been left up to me. There's never been a restriction on the books that can be put out or the literature that could be distributed. And when you look at the vast amount of material and literature and orthodox literature and materials that have been made available to the people at Kwasizabantu, no cult would expose their people to so many other teachers and external influences. So understanding how different cults work and understanding history and look at the definitions, there is no way that Kwasizabantu mission could be construed as a cult. Kwasizabantu mission is evangelical, they're Protestant, they are plainly in the mainstream of evangelical Christianity, as has been recognized by the ministers coming to the ministers' conferences, the guest speakers at the ministers' conferences, and this has been for decades. So to allow some secular journalists to be trial by media and to allow some disgruntled people who, whatever the situation is, even if you take the accusations at face value without knowing the context and without hearing any explanations or mitigating factors from others involved or those accused, it is quite clear that these accusations in no way infringe on the integrity and the extraordinary effectiveness and blessing of this mission over many decades to many tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. Because what these individuals are many times talking about is maybe a crime or mistreatment by an individual, often a family member, or by somebody who's disgruntled, who's left the mission, like Muzi Kaneni, who testified that he was a spy and an infiltrator anyway. And plainly, there's other factors at work. So I believe what we're seeing right now is psychological warfare, the targeting of a Christian mission in a time when politicians are pushing for expropriation without compensation, land seizures. And I think Kwasizabantu mission has been targeted for discrediting and for discouragement and for displacement in preparation for a land grab. I mean, that's my estimation. I believe that there's sinister forces behind this, and I don't believe that this targeting of this uniquely blessing of a mission is at all accidental. I don't think this is just bad journalism.
Dr. Hammond, do you perhaps just want to touch on what do you mean by psychological warfare?
Yes, so psychological warfare, understand that warfare is far more than the clash of armies and the clash of weapons. It is aiming at the body, mind, and spirit, the will. In fact, as von Clausewitz said, that the main goal in warfare is to break the will of the enemy to resist. And Confucius said that the greatest way of waging war is not to actually fight, but to destroy your enemy's will to resist. And so psychological warfare can be broken down to two sides. There's PSYOPs, own forces, where you build up the morale of your own people. And there's PSYOPs or PSYWAR, psychological warfare, enemy forces, or a local population, where you break down the morale of the other side. And so in this gaslighting, Stockholm syndrome, the whole goal of guilt manipulation is a key part. And so guilt manipulation, or throwing so many accusations against a person to make them ashamed of themselves so that they're not even willing to defend themselves. This is, in fact, the goal of PSYWAR. And you can see in many cases that, just take, for example, communist revolutionaries, they seldom win a war militarily. They win it through psychological warfare means, by deception and by disinformation and by guilt manipulation, by rewriting history, which is why Karl Marx, the founder of communism, said the first battlefield is a rewriting of history. So PSYWAR is what breaks down morale. And they do this with false flag operations, invented or exaggerated atrocity stories, the zoom lens instead of the wide angle lens. And so in many cases, you can make something seem, in fact, the opposite. You can do an reality inversion through psychological warfare by focusing on something with a zoom lens and ignoring the wide angle lens of context.
Thank you, Dr. Hammond. At this juncture, I think we can move on to Professor Kim. Thank you, Professor, again for joining us from all the way from South Korea. Professor, in your study in 2011, you compared Kwasizabantu mission with other Protestant communities. Can you tell us more about your studies and what your findings were? And can you also perhaps tie it in with the question that this webinar is dealing with, and that is whether Kwasizabantu mission is a cult? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I have researched 10 Protestant communities of the world, including KSB, in my dissertation. The consequence of my research is as follows. First, most Protestant communities have authentic founding spiritual leaders like Reverend Elfrieda. Second, most of the Protestant communities were started with a clear calling from God. The very well-known Protestant community, Brudhof. The calling of Brudhof is to be a witness to the gospel through a practicing radical Christianity in community. In case of Teze community in Bronx, the calling of Teze is to promote reconciliation and unity among the divided churches. The calling of the Kwasizabantu mission is to be an authentic mission through God's revival. And number three, most Protestant communities live a communal life, even though the focus and mode of the community life are different and varied. And number four, most communities are committed to the pursuit of church renewal and revival. The communities pursue church revival, church renewal through a restoration of the early church community in brotherly love, the practice of radical discipleship, preservation of biblical truth, the recognition of the role of the spiritual gifts, repentance and revival. These communities are channels of renewal of the church. Number five, most Protestant communities are non-denominational. Even though the communities have their own denominational backgrounds, they are non-denominational. The formation of the communities was a result of voluntary commitment and non-institutional orientation. Number six, most of communities are also involved in very active mission. They preach the gospel in an evangelistic way and send missionaries to the unreached part of the world. Their evangelism does not only take place through the spoken word, but also by their good works in obedience to the word and their very presence. The communities reach out to the needy with various ministries of the compassion and the preaching of the gospel. The spirituality of Kwasizabantu is similar to that of the evangelical Sister of Mary in Germany. The evangelical Sister of Mary and Mission Kwasizabantu put a strong emphasis on repentance and personal revival. They consider repentance as the key to true spirituality and have experienced revival. Both of them experienced powerful works of the Holy Spirit, but they are in the stream of pietistic evangelicalism rather than a charismatic movement. They have an active ministries in local evangelism and world missions. That is the result of my research about Protestant community, including Kwasizabantu. The next, I would like to answer about the next question about whether Kwasizabantu is cult or not. A cult, somebody ask us, what is the cult? What is the definition of cult? A cult is a kind of secret sect with extreme religious belief. Mission Kwasizabantu is an evangelical institution aiming to promote the gospel of Jesus Christ. For 3 decades, has resulted in Mission Kwasizabantu functioning as a church. Where the word is preached, sacraments served, and church discipline administered, there is church. Mission Kwasizabantu is evangelical in doctrine and practice fellowship with all children of God who identify with the basic tenets of the Christian church. Mission Kwasizabantu is an open evangelical missional church to promote the gospel of Jesus Christ. Therefore, Mission Kwasizabantu is not a cult. A cult has an extreme religious belief. The belief is partially or wholly not in accordance with the biblical truth. A cult's beliefs involve a denial of what they view as any of the essential Christian teachings, such as salvation, the Trinity, Jesus himself as a person, the ministry of Jesus, the miracles of Jesus, the crucifixion, the resurrection of Christ, the second coming, and the rapture. However, Mission Kwasizabantu publicly states that they thoroughly believe the biblical truth. Therefore, Mission Kwasizabantu cannot be regarded as a cult. A cult is an exclusive society of specific people. However, Kwasizabantu does not have any special membership procedure. Membership requirement is simply having a fellowship with members and living for God in biblical way life. It is a requirement that they feel calling from Mission Kwasizabantu. The process is open to everybody. Therefore, Mission Kwasizabantu cannot be regarded as a cult. A cult is a secret society of specific people for special purposes. However, there is a broader unity among Black and white, English-speaking South Africans, Afrikaners, and German mingle in the love that God has shed abroad in their hearts. The barriers of race, culture, and history have been basically destroyed at Mission Kwasizabantu. Therefore, it cannot be regarded as a cult. I have visited Mission Kwasizabantu several times. Currently, I am professor of theology at Pyeongtaek University in South Korea. As a professor of theology, I affirm that Mission Kwasizabantu is by no means a cult. It is a kind of evangelical missional church. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor. We really appreciate your input. Again, I can't tell you how much we appreciate it that you've tuned in at this very, very early hour, in the middle of the night where you are, and to also have your expertise on the topic. With this, I think, and due to time, what we will do is we'll ask Dr. Fleischmann to perhaps talk to us about her doctoral study on the life and ministry and teachings of Reverend Ella Stegen, who is the founder of the mission, and also about the revival among the Zulus and her research in that regard. And perhaps we can ask Dr. Fleischmann, as she's also been living on the mission for a long time, to conclude for us with her presentation and perhaps wrap the question up that brings us to this webinar. Thank you, Dr. Fleischmann.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to speak to you and to use technology in this way. Yes, Marcus, I've been on the mission for quite some time, over 18 years. And if it was a cult, I would definitely not have been here. I investigated the life of Reverend Stegen. And what I found was such a deepness and such sincerity, such humbleness, that it's really an example that one can follow as he follows Christ. Within a cult, a person takes the place of Christ, while on the mission it's not that at all. Many times people have gone to Reverend Stig and asked him for advice, what should I do? And always he has pointed the person back, go and pray about it, seek God's face, and then for sure you will get the answer, and then you need to do what God has told you to do. So never once from his sermons I could deduct that he shows himself as the great savior of a Messiah. He always, in all humbleness, like a true bondservant of Christ, has shown the way and pointed to him. The great emphasis on the mission is to live a scriptural life. And that is what Reverend Stegen has always preached and set an example. His very own household, those servants working for him in the house, testifies that the life he lives is so much deep in following this example of being a bondservant of Christ, like Timothy, like so many others that went before us. So really to smear a person and his ministry pitch black at the end of maybe his life is, I think, the most vicious attack one can do on one's neighbor. There's many of us that can testify to that. I've spoken to many witnesses. The Kwasizabantu mission website has published letter after letter of people so thankful for the work being done. So the question arises, why is there this opposition that's coming up? And it's, as the previous speaker said, it's not always now a new thing. It's the old allegations always simmering up. And in 2000, Reverend Stegen published a press release, and he said this press release is to answer the allegations now and also those that will still come that will be in the same line. So already there, he has mentioned that Kwasizabantu doesn't see itself as the exclusive owners of the truth. And therefore, all these ministers have been invited. So, Kwasizabantu Mission is an evangelical center where many ministers can come and rest. Many ministers from all over the world, many missionaries find a home, find a place of rest and a place to recharge and go back to their work. Another thing that I found within the ministry, Reverend Stegen has never asked anybody to leave their church. Up to date, from 2013 up till now, over 18,500 addicted youth to drugs has come through this mission's doors. Reverend Stegen had said he will even make place in his own home so as to provide opportunity for these troubled young people to find Christ and to have a restored life. So that was his heart, that was his labor, not just once or maybe twice, but through all these 60 years of ministry. And I found it quite, I would say, absurd that the English newspapers were tackled with all these allegations, while Reverend Stegen's ministry is basically also amongst the Zulu nation. And there I can just highlight from his life that in the high tide of apartheid, Reverend Stegen was hoeing the fields of the Africans. He was showing them to plant seeds to have food on the table. He was helping them. He was buying seeds. He was opening for them bank accounts that they can have their own produce. And through 60 years of hard labor on the mission field, he has poured himself out for the Zulu nation and also for the others that would like to join in this work. So for me, as an academic, I do have academic freedom. Nobody checked my notes just to hear what I'm going to say. I feel quite free and honest to speak to you about. And I would like to use illustration of a flower. When you've got a flower and you've got a bee will make honey from the flower, from the nectar. When you get a spider, the spider will make some toxin from this very same flower. And there we get these two divergent viewpoints. And in a revival, it's not an unusual thing. Even Paul in Acts 24, verse 14, he was accused of being a cult, and he was accused of many other things following the way, as they call it. And he was accused by the religious leaders of his day. And yet, we love Paul's letters. We read his letters to the churches. It's so encouraging to read it. So these we can say hatred that spit out of hell is, the behind motive of that is that Satan wants to paint this work pitch black so that none can get the blessings that sprout from this work. And as I've said, opposition is not a new thing. If we speak about revivals, Reverend Stegen has always said, if we don't accept a revival from above, we will receive a revival from below. Now, just to speak about the attacks on the mission and on revival per se, I can mention an example of Edwin Orr. He's the holder of 5 PhDs. He studied revivals throughout the world. And he said in the 1904 revival in Wales, the media attacked this revival started by Evan Roberts. And the media stated point blank after his death that Evan Roberts was an immoral man. And because of his ministry, there was a rise in illegitimate births. So Dr. Orr, when he read the newspaper article, he found the editor and he said of the paper, and he asked him, where do we get this information? So the editor stated he got it from a Baptist minister. So Orr said, well, I've also a Baptist minister and you haven't heard the last of me. So Dr. Orr contacted the Baptist minister and he asked him, where do you get this information from? And the minister replied and said he heard it from his mother, who knew a girl who thought it was so. So this whole rumor, there's all these articles in the newspaper started with one girl's opinion about the work. So Dr. Orr researched the work and he found actually the exact opposite, and he got a lot of statistics to prove his finding. So that brings me to the point of going back to the primary sources, especially for Christians. Here, I don't know if you can see so clearly, there is just something that can happen. For example, here we've got a person. This person saw something about this person, observed something, and then starts mention the thing to what I saw to 2 persons and that to 2 persons. Eventually, this whole group speaks to one another and say, yes, it must be true, what we've heard about this person. But none of these persons above ever dare to go back to the first person about who the rumor is being spread about. Another example that's from this revival is one of our dear Zulu co-founders, Lydia Dube and her mother. There was a lady working in the same shop as Kulu Dube, as we speak about her mother. And this lady said, now this was like over 50 years ago, that this Kulu Dube has got a Zionist spirit. And for so many years, this rumor has gone on and on and on. Even overseas branches has been troubled by this rumor. But nobody dared to take up the phone and call the person involved and say, is it like this or is it not like this? And we on the mission that stays here know for a fact it's really quite the opposite. We learn so much from our Zulu founders. We're together with Reverend Steek, and they're such a blessing to us. So for Christians in this time that we are in, it's crucial not to believe anything that we hear, but always go back and test it. If you hear something from a fellow brother or fellow sister in Christ, go back to that brother and sister and say, I've heard this and this. Is this true or is it not? And I would actually challenge one to take the very person that's bringing this wicked report about the brother and sister and take that person along and say, let's go and find out of the truth, if it's true or is it not. Now, regarding Jonathan Edwards, he's now known as the theologian of revivals, and actually turned out to be a theologian of revival by his description of revival. Because of these vicious attacks he also had to endure. Now, Armstrong, he said, I can only imagine how the media would respond to a genuine outpouring of the Holy Spirit in our time. Now, this is exactly what Tracy described already in the 1800s or 1842, observing the opposition and the hatred that Evans had to endure. Edwards had to endure, Jonathan Edwards. Now, this Tracy, and it was very interesting, it's written in the 1800s, 1842. It says here, regarding the opposition against the revival of Edwards in Northampton. If this is true, a true doctrine of true religion, their hopes are delusive and their souls are in danger of perdition. That means when one enters in a environment of a true revival, and one realizes God's searching heart is shining in one's own motives, one's own agendas, one's own sinfulness, it's very, very difficult for learned men to take that to heart, to realize maybe there's a possibility that I am lost, that I am in need of Christ, not just head knowledge, knowing who Christ is, but really to know him as one's personal savior. And because human nature, for being what it is, the evidence then are to gather so much evidence or work, real faults, and all that can be reported, bad interpretations, and put upon everything the hearer can behold or not understand, and every evil report should be exaggerated, till the sum of the total meet the wishes of those who are so anxious to condemn the work, lest the work condemns them. And then Tracy said, we found the same vigorous operation on a larger scale and with more permanent results the following year. So what the mission experienced, we can say in 77, in 2000, in 2020, it's every time on a larger scale, more vicious. And for me, it makes perfect sense. Now, I want to close with this thought. Our attackers have been maybe named by name tonight. But this is, I think, an invitation also from Reverend Stegan's side. His heart is still open. Those that have attacked the mission in this way, should they realize their mistake and should they realize the need their own soul is in, and should they phone him and say, I need help, I'm trapped by the snares of the devil and by these lies, please help me. Knowing the heart of God's humble servant, I'm sure he will still make a place, still make room, and point not to himself, but to Christ who has died for us all. So for that, I would like to close. I would just like to mention also a few books. I think Peter Hammond has mentioned there's one of Dr. Kurt Koch. He's written over 100 books. He had quite a number of doctoral degrees. I couldn't get to the count of that. And he had also lifelong membership at Cambridge University and the Academy of World Literature. So this is a very good book. It's God Amongst the Zulus. Then it's also one written by Reverend Stegen, Herlewing Begin by Yourself. That means revival doesn't start with the next one or the other one. It starts with ourselves, where we come to God and ask him to help us purify our own lives. And this is also another book about the history of the mission, a very good book. And then this one is from Theo Visser. There, the work of Reverend Stegen has been compared with many other revival preachers. It's quite a thick book. And I could also say this book is Revival and the Conviction of Sin. Now, conviction of sin is not a rule. Counseling is not a rule. It's nothing. Nobody is pressurizing anybody into going to counseling, and it's rather a help. One can meet with the counselor, and if there's a burden that one can share, one can do it. And as Reverend Stephen has written in a letter, it's for those that feel they need it. So it's not like a rule, like like that. So it's actually a freedom. It's a way to unload one's burdens if one's been trapped in all these lies, or even if one has been part of it or have drived it. There's a way out, and one's got your Christian brothers and sisters to be a witness as one makes these things right with God, and ask Christ to cleanse one from that. So from my side, I think that's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Marthes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fleischmann, also for your insights. With that note, I think we do not really have time for questions. There were quite a few questions in the Q&A function, but we already over time. So I'll be putting on the screen an email address that you can gladly email if you have any questions, any comments, anything that you'd like to add. There are also a number of hands that were risen, and I think it's for questions or to participate. And I think the topic is just too vast for us to really be able to engage with everyone. But with this note, I'd really like to thank each and everyone that participated, everyone that joined us, and our panelists, Peter Hammond, Professor Kim, Dr. Fleischmann, and also Advocate Matthee, who had to leave us due to other commitments. I want to thank each one of them for their contribution and for taking the time to speak to us. And we'll also be making available this video at a later stage, I think, on the website of Kwasizabantu Mission. If anyone would want to add anything or raise any questions or send any comments, you can send it to the email address that I've shared on the screen. And with that we're going to say good night, and I trust that you found this session also informative.